Hello bass players, welcome back. This lesson is all about the onboard controls, the knobs on the front of the body of the bass. I'll show you what controls you are likely to find on a bass and how to figure out what the controls on your bass actually do. I'll also give you my default configuration for various control combinations so that you don't have to overthink how to set up your controls. But first, let's talk about batteries. Your bass might have a battery. If it does, this means it's an active bass. If not, it's a passive bass. Batteries will often be found in the backside of the instrument. Not always, but often. And so, right here, you can see I have a battery compartment. In this bass, it looks a little different. So we flip this around and we actually see a magnetic plate holding that on. And because we're very special, we have two batteries there. An active bass may also be referred to as high impedance and a passive bass as low impedance. You should know which kind of bass you have because a active or high impedance bass will have a much higher output signal. When we learn about using an amp, we'll see that there are usually some settings on the amp that will accommodate either type of instrument. So again, it's just nice to know which type you have, active or passive. Two other things to know in case your bass is active. One, be sure to keep a spare battery around because you won't get any sound out of the bass or out of the amp without it. No battery, no sound. And number two is don't leave your bass plugged in because it will drain your battery very, very quickly. Active basses will have a preamp inside them. This both increases the volume output, as mentioned earlier, and gives you more control over the sound. So when you plug your cable into the jack, it turns the preamp on automatically, thereby draining the battery. I had a battery last over 10 years in a Music Man bass that I played. I played out with it quite a bit, so it got a lot of playtime, but I had the battery die on that same bass after being plugged in for I think just a couple of days. So don't leave your active bass plugged in. Sometimes you may need a screwdriver to take off a plate on the back of the instrument in order to get at the battery, which is super annoying because you now need to keep a battery and a screwdriver with your bass. Just try to find out if you have an active bass so that you are aware of your situation. The knobs on the body of the bass control the sound to some degree. What each knob actually does is different from bass to bass. If you don't have a manual for your bass, and if you can't find one online, then you'll have to deduce what your knobs on the bass do on your own. I'll take you through some of the most common control types and configurations. If you know what the controls are likely to do, then it's usually not that hard to figure it out in any given instrument. As we go through some of these various configurations, I will show you examples on specific basses, and I will give you my default settings for what I recommend, how I recommend that you set up those controls initially. If your bass has only one knob, then it's probably a volume control. That's pretty unusual for a bass to have only one control knob on it, but it does happen. As with all of your bass controls, clockwise will increase the control factor and counterclockwise will decrease it. So you can turn the bass up by doing this. Hit a string, I don't hear a sound. This is my volume control. As I bring it up, clockwise, we hear the bass. Volume is pretty self-explanatory. It makes your bass louder or less loud, quieter. Except for special circumstances, you generally want to have your volume all the way up, and then use the amplifier to control the actual room volume, the sound that your bass is producing. Lowering your volume on the bass generally results in a lower quality tone and a sound that just isn't as full as it could be. So keep your volume up unless you want to cut your sound off completely and then just turn it all the way down. Let's say you set your volume up like halfway and then try to make up for it at the amp. That's when your tone is going to suffer. Your bass is just not going to sound as good. My default setting for a single volume knob is all the way up. If you have two knobs on your bass, then it's probably volume and tone. Think of a tone knob as giving you a slight treble boost, boosting the high-end sounds of your instrument. If you have numbers from 1 to 10 on your tone control, or if you can picture your tone knob going from 1 to 10, from the lowest setting to the highest setting, then I usually set my tone knob at about 2.5, about a quarter of the way up. If you cut the tone completely, it deadens the sound quite a bit. But if you turn it all the way up, it can just have a lot of high end, create some static, a lot of finger noise. As always, just try things out, do what sounds best to you. To me, easy does it on the tone knob, but to each their own. My default setting for volume and tone is volume knob all the way up and tone about a quarter of the way up. If you have 3 knobs on your bass, then you are likely to have volume, volume, and tone. In this case, you have 2 volume knobs, one for each pickup. This would be an exception to the full volume rule. You may want to decrease your volume some or even all of the way on one of the pickups to create a different sound. The neck pickup tends to be a bit rounder in tone, and the bridge pickup tends to be a bit sharper. Again, play around with them and try to find the sound that you like. But my default setting here is going to be both volumes all the way up and tone about a quarter of the way up. Let's go through this configuration together and try and figure out what this bass actually does. So I've got 3 knobs, which means that I'm thinking it could be volume, volume, and tone, but it could be something else as well. So let's figure it out. I'm going to turn them all the way down to start, and of course I should hear nothing coming out of the amp. So if I turn this top one up, what happens? Well, now I've got some sound, okay? If I turn this one up, I still have some sound. Sounds maybe a little bit different, but I'm wondering what exactly that did. So I'll turn that first one all the way down. I still have some sound, okay? And I'll turn this one all the way down, that second one. Ah, the sound went away. So I can tell these are both volume knobs because if I turn one of them up, I get sound. Turn it off, turn the other one up, and I get sound. So I can deduce these are both volume knobs, and the lower one goes to my lower pickup or my bridge pickup, and the higher one goes to my neck pickup or the higher pickup, the pickup on this side. So I have figured out those are both volume knobs. It's extremely likely that this is a tone knob, so I figured it out. It's volume, volume, tone on this bass. Another configuration you might see for 3 knobs could be volume, tone, and sweep. Instead, in this case, of 2 volume controls, you have just 1 volume control, and the sweep gives you the ability to mix the sound between the 2 different pickups. Turning your knob all the way up in the clockwise direction will turn on your neck pickup, and it'll bring it all the way on, and it'll turn your bridge pickup off. Going all the way in the counterclockwise will do the opposite, bringing the bridge pickup all the way up, but turning the neck pickup off completely. And putting this knob in the middle should put both pickups at full volume. The sweep control is easier to recognize because it will usually have a center notch in the middle, a place where the knob will want to stop at the halfway point. This is so that you can put it exactly in the middle without having to guess where the middle is. Volume and tone generally do not have that center notch. My default setup for this configuration is volume all the way up, of course, sweep in the middle so that both pickups are all the way on, and the tone knob again at about a quarter of the way up, or wherever you like it. On this bass here, this happens to be my sweep control. I can feel that there's an exact spot in the center where that knob wants to come to rest. There's a little bit of resistance here, so it doesn't really want to turn one way or the other. I can overcome that and then turn it, of course, but that is what I mean by a center notch. Now, past this point, things get a little more interesting. Remember, if you have a battery in your bass, then you have an active bass, and that means that your bass has an onboard preamp, which both boosts your signal and colors your sound. The preamp that is used on your bass will give that bass a certain flavor, but you can further control that sound using an onboard EQ. If you have an active instrument, you will generally have at least low and high EQs available to boost or cut the lower and higher frequencies being produced by the instrument. These controls will have a tremendous effect on your sound, whether good or bad, and should be used carefully. These EQ knobs should be easier to recognize because they will also have the center notch, just like the sweep did, so that you can put them in the middle at 0, neither cutting nor boosting the signal. This should be considered their default state. Sometimes the knobs are physically smaller or grouped together to be easier to recognize. If you have 3 of these knobs, then you also have a mid-range EQ available to you. If you have a switch located around the EQ area, then that is likely to be a mid-range EQ sweep. This will change what frequency the mid-range knob controls. lower middle, middle, and higher middle. If this is outside your range of comfort zone or your understanding, then just leave the mid EQ alone and don't worry about it for now. Or jump on YouTube or Google and learn more about EQ. If you are new to bass playing, EQ should probably be very low on your list of priorities. This can always be added to your studies later on. Which control knob controls which EQ should be fairly obvious if you just play around with them a little bit. Usually the bass is on one end and of course the treble is on the other, and that puts the mid EQ right in the middle. My default setting, if you have EQ, is of course volume all the way up, sweep in the middle, and then set all the EQs to the middle. Then take the bass EQ up anywhere from slightly to all the way, depending on what sounds good to you. On a Music Man bass, I always have the bass EQ all the way up, but on Ibanez basses, the bass EQ has a much greater effect, and all the way up is usually too much. So I just put that bass EQ up a little bit, anywhere from a quarter to halfway. As always, use your ears and decide what works best for you. Okay, let's practice figuring out what these knobs do and setting them up into their default positions with a couple of real live basses. Here I have a 4-string Ibanez bass, and I know it's an active bass because I've got a battery right there. Beyond that, I start looking at my controls. I see 2 larger controls. I see 3 smaller controls. And so I'm thinking I've probably got like volume, volume, or volume and sweep. And then these are probably EQ. So let's check those out. If I hit a string and I turn this one all the way up, then I get some volume. So that's clearly a volume knob. This one, if I move it back and forth, I can also hear the sound changing as it goes from the bridge pickup, which is turned all the way to the right, or the neck pickup, which is turned all the way to the left. Kind of a tinny sound there. In the middle sounds nice. And all the way to the bridge. Sorry, to the neck. So that must be my sweep. So I've got volume all the way up, sweep in the middle. These 3 EQ knobs, I'm going to find the center. There's a center there, and the center there. I've got my default pretty much set up here. Volume all the way up, sweep in the middle, EQs in the center. Now I want to figure out where my bass EQ is, where my high EQ is. So I'm just going to play the open A string here. If I turn this one up, that definitely sounds like I've got a lot more bass in there. If I cut that all the way, really takes the bass out of the sound. So this must be my bass EQ. And this must be my mid and my high. But for now, I'm going to leave everything as my default. EQs are in the middle. I'm going to take that bass just a little bit up, give my bass a little bit more body, but that's probably going to sound pretty good. Okay, I've got another Ibanez bass here. The other Ibanez bass, this was the bass EQ. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. And that does seem to be bringing up that bass quite a bit. This is clearly my bass EQ. This makes this my mid EQ, my high EQ. Now again, this switch, because this is my lower EQ, I'm assuming that this switch is gonna make this a lower range lower mid range, middle of the mid range, and high end of the mid range. And so I don't know if we can tell the difference here. Let's just go ahead and, just for fun, we'll crank that up. This is the lower mid range. Here's the middle mid range. Can definitely hear a difference there. And here's the high end of the mid range. And so you can hear that we're getting very different effects from moving this switch around while that mid EQ is boosted all the way up. Again, have fun with it, enjoy yourself, don't get too distracted by it, but it can be, there's some fun to be had there. So again, default for just a regular bass sound all the way up. Volume in the middle is my sweep. Middle for my high and low EQ. And that bass, let's turn the volume on. That bass, let's just turn that up a little bit. Just give that a little bit of oomph. And for our last bass, I've got something a little bit special, this beautiful Dingwall bass on loan from a friend. And let's see what this does. We see that there's a battery in it. Take that off. I've got 2 batteries there. I know that this is an active bass. I'm going to go ahead and hit a string, that top one, probably my volume. Let's see how that sounds. Yeah, got some volume there. This one, I feel the center notch. Okay, that's probably a sweep. I could check that out, but we're gonna trust that's a sweep for right now. These three, these are probably EQ. They're not different sizes. They're not smaller like they were on the Ibanez bass. But we can go ahead and feel, and we'll feel that they do have, where is it? So is that a center notch? Where is it? Yeah, there it is. I feel the center notch there. And there's the center notch on that one. There's the center on this one. So these are all in the center now. Sounds fine. So let's go ahead and take this one, boost it up. Yeah, that's definitely our bass. Cut it, that's definitely our bass. This switch will of course control the mid-range EQ, so we can dial that in to our liking. And this bass has something a little bit special on it. When I first picked up this bass, I couldn't make the EQ do anything. So it actually sounded like this. And I'm dialing the bass EQ and I'm dialing the treble. I don't know which is which yet. And it doesn't sound like anything. And that's because this switch here was pulled out. That's called a pull switch. And that's unusual, but you do see that on some instruments. So when you pull the switch out, it makes it a passive bass. So if you push it in, it's active. You pull it out, it's passive. So when this is a passive bass, it's going to have a lower output value. I'll have to correct for that on my amp, dial that in on my amp. And then of course, when I hit the passive or the active switch, push it in to make it active. Now I've got more power coming out, and these EQs actually have some effect on the sound. That is your passive active combination option. Next, we've got a Music Man bass to try and figure out. Got a 9-volt battery there, confirmed active bass. I'm wondering what these switches do. Again, I'm assuming this top one is volume, so I'll play a string, bring that all the way up. Volume confirmed, that seems to be volume. Now I only have one pickup on this. There's 2 sets of magnets, 2 rows of magnets, but this is considered one pickup in the way that it's set up. So I don't really expect to see a sweep control on here. I'm gonna explore these. All these knobs are the same size. They don't appear to, there's no visual difference between them, so I'm gonna go after this and see what it feels like. Ooh, I got a center notch, got a center notch, I've got a center notch. So I'm assuming this is low, mid, and high EQ. The low EQ has been here on the Ibanez. Let's see what that does. And if I bring that up, that does not sound like my low EQ. Let's go ahead and cut that all the way. No, that's sounding more like maybe a high EQ. So let's go ahead and take it all the way back here. Let's bring this one up all the way. And that gives me more of a full body sound. Now, again, on the Music Man, I like to have that bass EQ all the way up. I just think that's the best sound for most situations. So that's where I put it. I hope that answers most, if not all, of your questions about the control knobs for your bass. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.